Good afternoon, Maine. Welcome to the Muddy Waters podcast, which exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on here in our state by bringing in experts and people in the know, because the mainstream media is failing at their duty. So we have to bring people in and speak to you through alternate means. So thank you for joining us today, Honorable Heidi Sampson.
Hi, Chuck. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Always glad to have you on. Always glad to have conversations with you in general as one of the long-term freedom fighters here in our state. Always happy to hear from you and hear your perspective on different things. And obviously, in the wake of the most significant thing that's happened in American politics in my lifetime, I think, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I just which. We were very fortunate here in the state of Maine because of some connections that you had made to be able to bring, Charlie Kirk here to Maine. And I had the opportunity. It's so weird to call it an opportunity when it's like the Charlie Kirk, we've lost Charlie Kirk, one of the most fantastic human beings that we have had here, in the United States, in the world. Really. And so I hate calling anything associated with his death an opportunity, but it would be lying to say it wasn't. So I had the opportunity to go out to Arizona. I had to stand in line from 4 a.m. In order to make sure I got into the stadium. I think I got like 4 hours of sleep ahead of time, and be able to be there for one of the most significant events, in our time, which was just incredible. But I wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear him speak in person if not for you. So I wanted to, if you had anything to say or share about that whole process of bringing Charlie to Maine and your experiences with him while he was here.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think of where to go with this because honestly, I think Charlie leads. We're very quickly you discover what motivates Charlie, and his heart and his actions speak volumes. More is caught than taught. Charlie's way of being, he demonstrates that he walks humbly before his God. And there's a scripture verse. I think it's Micah. No.
Yeah, Micah 6:8, I think.
6:8, and it says, "The Lord requires of me to do justly, to love mercy and kindness, and to walk humbly before your God." And I think Charlie lived that, and clearly his wife lives that. And it is, I could, here I am on your show, and it's literally a verse I say every single day. It's in my devotions. And I take that seriously. And so when I just see how in his life there are so many things that just there were supernatural that just fell into place. You think that's coincidence? Well, you can say that, but I know differently because I've seen things like that happen in my life. So, for example, I'm at an event in Freeport, and I think you might have been there. There was a whole bunch of folks from the X community that came because they had heard that the event was canceled, and then we found a location, within 24 hours. And so actually the whole hoopla on canceling, and that, of course, I was coming into this community and I'm being targeted as this horrible, hateful person. And so this drove people to the event. So it was almost standing room only there. And when I was done speaking, this gentleman came up to me, and you now know him, Leyland Strife. And I'd never even met him before. And he came up to me and he said, "Do you know Charlie Kirk?" And I know you've heard the story, but that was just sort of a providential moment, because as I spoke, when I introduced Charlie and I gave my little presentation before, they had asked me to, share a little bit about what you're doing, Heidi. to tell what I'm doing now, I have to kind of go back and tell what I was doing, because otherwise there's like, where do you fit it? And I had spent 30 years homeschooling kids, not only mine, but other people's children, who would be dropped off here at the farm, literally at 6 in the morning, and be picked up at 6 at night. And I, I had a one-room schoolhouse. I had a toddler, and we had all the way up to teenagers. And, but one of the things that really drew me to Charlie, and this was the question that I was asked, do I know him? As soon as he was like 18 years old, and he was starting to go to these campuses and just had a table and prove me wrong or whatever, he'd have some sort of open-ended statement that would spur people on to question and to have dialogue. And I just think about where we are today, and that is a lost art. And it was something that was so important to me, that I would teach kids debate and how to communicate, how to do your research, and how to prepare, and how to present yourself accurately. And so when he asked me that, I was just smiling, and all this stuff was coming back in my mind, like, oh yeah, I know Charlie. And so he introduced me, because his brother, and we saw him, he spoke at Charlie's event, Justin.
Yep.
And he put me in touch with his brother immediately and said, you guys need to talk, and we need to, you guys need to connect. So anyway, that led to about, I think it was 10 months later, we had Charlie showing up in Old Orchard Beach. And that was a phenomenal event. And we packed as much as we could. That was like taking 10 pounds and packing into a 5-pound bag. There were so many things that went on. I mean, he met with my team and privately, which was phenomenal. And then we had our reception, and then we had the big event. And then later there was a dinner for people, just a private dinner with Charlie, which was phenomenal. And so, to have sat with him and had dialogue with him and picked his brain and got his heart on some things that I wanted to know. And, he's like, I can't come and do everything for you guys. And we're like, no, just show us some of the things that we may not be doing. We don't know. It's like, I'd like to have all the ideas out on the table. And it's like, what have we not done that we could be doing here in Maine to change the tide of what is happening? I mean, Charlie came in hot, and it was so funny because that day they show up, and his chief of staff, Mikey McCoy, I had been in touch with through the whole process. And he came in and he said, well, Charlie's coming in hot. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but he was fired up about what was happening in Maine. So here he is in Maine, and he's watching Maine being taken over by, illegal immigrants. And he said, immigration without assimilation is an invasion. And he's absolutely right. And he spoke to that very, very strongly. And it was not the subject that we had asked him to speak about, which is kind of funny, but he was hot. And that was the pressing issue in Maine at that time. It still is a pressing issue. And it's something that is going to have to be addressed with our next governor, hopefully, as somebody that has brains in their head and understands the bigger picture here. And the bigger picture is not to destroy this state, but to restore it and put good governance back into place with good people that don't fail up because they're just literally miserable failures at what they're doing. And then they get promoted into higher positions. And then we see epic failure on so many levels. And that's another subject for another day, but I get pretty hot about that. There's ample examples of people who are in the administration that have failed up. And it's disgusting, and we need to change that. So all of that, he was an inspiration to us. He is still an inspiration to us because his vision, somebody's vision and somebody's ideas, how do you think we formed this country? It was because there were deep thinkers like Charlie who put things in writing so that our founding fathers read really rich content that provoked their thinking and their philosophy on governance and how we could have the most free operating, that the people are the engine, and how do we establish a free market economy. And that came out of a lot of study and research from all these mostly men, but there were women that were also very well read and would, Abigail Adams is an example, and she would challenge her husband. This is how our country was formed, is by ideas and philosophies that were put forward with concrete um, points and points of discussion that could be debatable. Like, you could debate these things. They had meat on the bones, as opposed to these fleeting emotional whims that we are now um, educating our children in. There's no content, there's no substance, there's no history behind what you're saying. You're blowing smoke out of your backside, and it's ridiculous. This is not how we build something. What Charlie did was he has established a solid record of his philosophy, why he was very well read. He understood history. He understood how to apply it in context to what's going on now. Well read in the scriptures, and all the philosophers. I mean, do they study philosophy and put it in the context anymore into what's going on today and compare it to the original philosophers and line things up and like start really challenging and wrapping your brain around things? No, they don't do that. It's like an inch deep. No real substantive thinking is going on. So I say all that, and I'm sure you weren't expecting this kind of answer, but these are just the thoughts that I have had over the last several weeks. And when you're ready, I would like to share the vision that I had when I found out Charlie had died, or before when he had been shot. But you can go ahead and ask me a question.
No. I was, obviously incredibly blessed by Charlie being here in Maine and being able to hear him speak. And as you said, he came in hot, and he said some things that I'm sure the Maine Democrats did not appreciate and were frightened by truth. They're always frightened by truth. Again, this is why the ominous they, but this is why they killed him, is because they couldn't defeat him in conversation. They couldn't defeat him in a debate, so they decided to silence him. And if he had spent too much time in Maine and was too public in Maine, they would have found a way to do the same thing here. And man, I remember being in that event and sitting there thinking to myself that something like that could have happened. Like, I mean, while I was there, it was running through my mind that the left hates him so much that they could do this. Like, I knew that this was a possibility. Anyway, just that was one of the things that was running through my mind in the event. And I was just like, wow, like this, like, because he's saying the things that you're not supposed to say, right. But to your point, this is how our nation was founded. But I remember, as it relates to this, when I went up and gave testimony in Augusta on the boys and girls sports issue, or getting boys out of girls sports is what we were trying to do. And I remembered listening to a lot of the conversation from the left, right? And what the other side was saying. And like almost every person who was getting up and giving testimony was saying that even just having this conversation is dangerous and harmful to trans people. And it's like, okay, so you're trying to use empathy and sympathy to manipulate us out of having a conversation about reality, because you can't win the actual conversation. Right. So your only possibility is to try and manipulate us into feeling bad about speaking truth. And so they are not interested in engaging in debate because they can't win debate, because they can't even tell you what a woman is. That's a whole other story.
And they want to weaponize our empathy.
Absolutely.
And it's like, whatever, I'm moving forward.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear kind of the vision that you had when you found out he'd been shot.
Yeah. Well, I've been telling everybody because it's hopeful. And you were there when I spoke to everybody, and I challenged the young people. like, here's an example. Charlie is an example of having had a dream, a vision for his life. And I shared my vision, most recent vision that pertains to education. And I wanted them, these young people to share, have a vision. A lot of these young people don't even dare ask, like, have this thought. I ask all the time when I'm working with young people, if you could do anything in the world, what would you want to do? And start to get them dreaming, because they're not allowed to do that in the education system, in the way the pedagogy works. It's not allowed. So I heard, I'd gotten the news. I was like, it's like you almost feel like you've been shot, that it's that kind of news that hits you.
Mm.
And I had a meeting I had to get ready for, where I had a gubernatorial campaign panel that I was hosting, and I'm running around, and this is in my head, and I'm like deeply burdened for for his health and safety, but really Erica and his children and his parents. I mean, Charlie is the same age as my youngest.
Hmm.
And so his parents, they're my age or younger. And that is, I mean, it's devastating to consider losing one of your children. That's not supposed to happen. So anyway, I had to go out because I have a farm. I had to take care of all the animals. So I'm outside running around because I had to come in, take a shower, and not smell like a goat when I left to my meeting. So I go out. So I'm out there, and just very prayerful, heavy-hearted. And I was, at one point, I'm standing, and I think I was just filling water buckets, and I'm looking down at my feet. And in my mind's eye, I'm hearing this tractor. And at first I thought it was real. And I'm looking up, and I could just see, and this happens to me often. I have just like word pictures that come across, sort of this screen that goes, a movie screen that goes across my mind. And I hear this tractor, and I'm looking up, and it's this bush hog, and it's super wide bush hog. And it's driving away from me, and it's just blazing through the wilderness. And I'm looking up, and I continue to look up, and I see the back of somebody. And I was like, wait a minute, that looks like the back of Charlie. And I'm watching this bush hog going way off in the distance and blazing this wide path, which, by the way, was turning into just grass. It wasn't like stumps and stuff and twigs. And then he disappeared into the woods in the back, way off in the distance. And at that point, I knew he had died. And I put my head down, and I just started to break. And I'm looking at my feet, and I start seeing flowers, all these different types of flowers popping up and going all the way down that path to where Charlie had disappeared in the woods. I'm telling you, that to me was a promise that Charlie's death is not final. And what is it? John 12:23-24, lest a kernel of wheat dies and goes into the ground. I mean, if it doesn't die, it just stands alone. But if it dies and goes into the ground, much fruit is produced. I'm misquoting it, but I'm basically saying that more comes up. And that, to me, was exactly what I was saying to these kids. And that has been my message to young people as long as I have worked with young people, which has been a long time, because I now have gray hair. They've caused it all. I just want you to know. But that's the impact. That's the impact Charlie has had. And I have received so many calls from young people that I've known in the past, and college students, get me the contact information. I want to start a turning point where we are. And it's just that whole week I was getting those calls. So it's gut wrenching. And watching the service yesterday, I have to go back and watch some more of it because I had to catch it here and there, was absolutely phenomenal. I just was so excited to hear everything that was being proclaimed, all the good things, honorable. You know, the scriptures say, taste the Lord and see that he is good. And he was elevated in this whole thing. And Christ was. I mean, the gospel went out over and over and over. And if people don't understand that Christianity is not rooted in hate, it's rooted in love. Nothing was more powerful than when Erica said, I forgive him. That forgiveness is such a powerful, powerful tool to release built up toxins that literally build up in your system and try and ruin your life. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in my children having to deal with things. And it's like, you know, you have children who have an issue and just struggle and struggle and struggle until they finally come to the end of themselves. And it's like, this is, if you would just forgive in this particular situation, you may see things change. And I've just watched some young people I've worked with over the years. They decide to take that step and then they see everything turn around. The lack of forgiveness is when this poison builds up and wants to ruin your life. So the root of, you know, a major pillar of the Christian faith is rooted in forgiveness, because the ultimate really roots of the of Christianity is love. And it's that unbelievable compassion for humanity, that you love even those who are your enemies. We're imperfect. We're not all going to do this right. But when you're in a position where you're confronted with something horrible, like what Erica is facing, for her to say that and the whole world heard it, I'm sorry, people, but that's the reality of Christianity. That's the rubber meeting the road Christianity. It's heavenly principles being brought down to earth in reality. And I was just like, my husband wanted to leave, and I'm like, I have to finish listening to her. And then she said that. I was just puddles. I was puddles. It was so powerful. I still get choked up thinking about it.
Yeah, well, if you haven't seen it, the other one that I think is really, I mean, there are a lot of really great speeches. If you got time, go and watch them. Actually, I think the Mikey guy that you were talking about, that was his speech was really good. But Tucker's was actually, in my opinion, the second best to Erica's. And he hit on the other. So she quoted, you know, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And then that's where she went into that young man, I forgive him. Right. You know, so, but Tucker talks about the fact that prior to that, you know, in order to, part of, we forgive because we've already been forgiven. The first thing is, like in the Lord's Prayer, is forgive us our trespasses as we are. Yes, we forgive those who trespass against us, right? We're able to forgive others only once we've received forgiveness ourselves. And so it is one of those things about Christianity that, like, I think a lot of people just don't get. But here's just for fun, it's important, because there are a number of people that are not happy with that approach, and that they're obviously not Christians, or they don't understand that aspect of Christianity. There's this, like, I think the concern that they have, and I think it's a legitimate one, is a concern about allowing injustice to prevail, right? Is like, if we forgive people, and it's like, okay, let's be very clear what we're talking about. The personal grudge or gripe or whatever between her and him is where the forgiveness is coming in. She's not saying, and we're not saying, that there are going to be no consequences. In fact, I'll let it be on the record that I'm in favor of capital punishment in this situation. I'm happy to be there.
Yes, that's where justice comes in.
I'm happy to be there and preach the gospel to him and hope to save his soul before they take him to the firing squad or whatever it is. But I think that ultimately, like, that's what's necessary in this situation. And you know, I think that's important to keep in mind, is that when we're talking about forgiveness here, we're not talking about not holding people accountable.
That's a personal thing between
Yeah.
you and God. But
Right.
then there's government, and
Right.
government has the balance of justice.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate category. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no, it was a really really incredible event to be at. Unlike other people, I didn't post a bunch of photos and videos, although I did take some. And maybe I'll throw those up eventually. But yeah, it's just incredible to be there, and it's just a really incredible moment, as you said. So one of the things that Charlie was getting to, and if you listen to his interview with Jordan Peterson, which anybody who hasn't, I highly recommend you do that, because it's like, I think it's the
Yeah.
only like interview in a podcast form where people have actually gone through his trajectory of where he started and what kind of changed along the way, and then to where he was. And one of the places that he is kind of like a shift in a recognition that in order for us to save our country, it's going to be more than just politics. And I know that not everybody who listens is engaged in are Christians and care about Christianity, but the founding fathers built our Constitution for a moral and a religious people. Like, it only works with a religious and moral people. And so there is a need, and I think in order for us to be able to save and restore our republic, of spiritual renewal and revival in our world. And that's kind of where Charlie was shifting more towards, I think, in his trajectory. That's where he was becoming more concerned and focused. And what's really interesting is we saw, and they talked about it, they're like, we've started, a revival has started here today. I would critique them a little bit, and I would say, no, it started like 11 days ago. And yes, there were some people that it was the craziest thing. This is like, obviously it's nationally televised, and yet they're inviting people to come to know Jesus. And people are standing and making that decision at the event. I would say probably hundreds of people, if not more, around the stadium stood saying that they wanted to follow Jesus. And just a really, really interesting time, because even if you're not a Christian, like, one of the things that you have to recognize that's true in our culture is our culture has become incredibly anti-Christian. From all of our institutions, where you go to colleges and they mock Christianity, they mock this faith. They're all about all the other faiths, but Christian faith, there's this like inherent hatred toward Christianity. And it's even if you're not a Christian, it's got to be a little weird. It's like, okay, like, why are we demeaning and bemoaning this one religion and holding up all the others? Like, it's part of the kind of the Marxism and a number of other things. But it's really interesting. And so, like, even if you're not a Christian, you have to recognize that, like, this is actually a positive step, that there are national television stations that were broadcasting this. And because I think we need to be, whether we are officially a Christian nation or not, we need to not be a nation that hates Christianity, if that makes sense. Christians are incredible members of society, and we have a society that's incredibly broken, with a lot of people that do not have any faith, and their whole lives are falling apart and unreeling. And Christianity gives a lot of people like that hope if they will accept it. And so, anyway, I just think that was a really interesting and an incredible thing that tended to be the focus. Everybody couldn't talk about Charlie, if you actually knew Charlie, and talk about his motivation for doing what he was doing, without talking about his faith. And so that was a really compelling aspect of being there. So yeah. So, well, I could probably talk about Charlie Kirk for another 20 hours, but I think people are probably reaching a point, given the inundation that we've had over the course of the last 12 days of Charlie Kirk fatigue. And I actually asked you to come on for another reason anyway. So, but I felt like we had to talk about that. It's just this huge thing that's happened, and it's impacted all of us in different ways. And I will say, I think it's definitely the most significant event in my life. It may dwarf in time, as people look back, the JFK, RFK, MLK, assassinations, when we look at it clearly. And so it's just a really interesting, hopefully turning point for our country. But I wanted to have you come on to talk about, there have been, I've had Nick Murray came on back in, I think it was either late December, early January, and he was talking about school choice, and in like a very positive, like he's very pro school choice. And there are a number of people, I think, in our state who are pro school choice. And then you have a number of people who are Well, one of the surprising things was a guy named David Giles who came on. He's running for House District 27. He's a conservative, and he's not in favor of school choice, but he's really more in favor of people being involved in the public school. And so he was trying to encourage homeschoolers to send their kids back to public school. Anyway, so given that I understand you know a little bit about education and you have some opinions on this, I wanted to see like what your thoughts were around school choice and kind of why you've landed where you've landed.
Yeah, well, for those that may not know, having served 5 years on the State Board of Education and then 8 years in the legislature, serving on the Education Committee. But prior to that, the reason I got onto the State Board of Ed was that Governor LePage was looking for a homeschooler who could serve on this board as the first homeschooler, what turned out nationally. But I had spent 20 years researching education as well and how to create the most effective learning environments. So there's some history there. I didn't just pop out of a bubble and this is my opinion. So while I was on the State Board of Education, I was also on the Charter School Commission. And this was when the charter schools were just getting started here in Maine. And a lot of the policies, the rules and everything needed to be worked out for the governing agency, the Charter Commission, which was made up of 3 State Board of Ed members. And then we had 6 other public at large individuals that we would, the 3 members, like myself and 2 others, we would, hire people that would apply to be part of the Charter Commission. And we would work on, overseeing all the different school board, the charter schools that were getting started. And I oversaw a couple of them. And part of the process was my sitting down and negotiating with the Department of Education and on behalf of the charter school, like working with a charter school and the Department of Education's lawyer on contracts and what agreements that they were making. And it was interesting to watch during my tenure on the state board. And then once being on the education committee, this information would be coming to us as a committee. And one of the things is all of the charter schools had to have their own plan and how they were going to do their academics. And there were so many different rubrics of things that they had to take care of and have a presentation and a plan. One of them was how they were going to assess their students. And in some cases, they would do an assessment at the beginning and then they would do an assessment at the end they would pick their assessment, their tool that they wanted to use. And that was okay. Sure, fine. Well, come time, and they may not be measuring up to what the Charter Commission really it was a Charter Commission, and then you'd have the Department of Education weighing in. And we started seeing a shift as the Charter Commission started tightening up their tightening up the reins on them as they weren't performing like they wanted them to perform. And I dare say if a public school was under the same scrutiny as these charter schools, we'd have much better public schools. Now, the charter schools in Maine are public schools, just so everyone understands that. They are not private entities at all. They follow the same rules that all the other schools have to follow, but they're given some latitude in the way they want to go about it. But what started to happen over time, things started to erode, and then they all had to take, they didn't have a choice in the assessment they needed to take. So the department wanted them to take the MEAs, the Maine Education Assessment. And so that choice of assessments disappeared for the charter schools. So, and then over time, some of them they did not get their charters because they weren't performing up to the DOE standard.
Hmm.
Well, so when you start to research assessments, everyone talks about these assessment this, assessment that. Well, assessments, their very nature is a psychological profile. They are measuring attitudes, values, belief systems, and they're much more on the subjective side, the information that they are gathering for these assessments. And the further the Department of Education shifted into social emotional learning, the more the assessments shifted. And guess what? It's an assessment of social emotional issues of students. It's really data harvesting. That's what assessments are. And an achievement test is their benchmarks of information that they've determined need to be learned. This is what we used as a standard of measure of how children performed for generations. It's like, okay, you need to know all these facts and figures. You need to know who these personalities are. You need to know this about science. You need to know this about math and English. You actually have to know how to spell and actually know grammar other than pronouns. And, you had to have read quality literature as opposed to these little excerpts. And then you have to write a paper about excerpts that you can't know the history behind who the author is or any of this stuff. These are the stupid stuff that Common Core brought in. Is so crazy. So they shifted away from these achievement tests to these assessments in the 90s when they went to standard-based education. I say all that because the assessments are what drive the end result. So let's go to the school choice issue. I don't care what school choice you're talking about. If the state has strings attached to the money that goes with a child, that state is going to control what assessment they take at the end. So in order to get the money the next time around, that child is going to have to perform well on the assessment. Now let's stop and think about a classical school where they actually are learning academics. Imagine that. And you have little Susie Q with her little backpack of money that has gone from the public sector into this classical school. Well, at the end of the year, Susie Q is going to have to she might take the test that the school has, but the Department of Education, I don't care what department and what state, they're going to require at some point, not maybe initially, to take the state assessment. Now, if that assessment is on psychological profiles, and look at where we are right now and all the things they have to learn how to do. I mean, they literally get prompts about, the Planned Parenthood. The fourth graders are reading about, excerpts about Planned Parenthood. And it's like, oh, well, you would think in a reading comprehension, that would be, well, like, what did you just read? And now the questions would be geared towards that. No, these assessments want to determine what that child's attitude about this is. Would you want to be a part of this? Do you think it's a good thing? Does this help women? Blah, blah, blah. Fourth graders, the National Organization for Women. This is all very left-leaning stuff. And I mean, this is stuff I had to go through and peel back the layers when I was researching the Common Core. And these are the assessments. This is what they're doing. Even in math, they're not teaching them mathematics and arithmetic and being accurate. They want to know, does the child have grit or tenacity?
What? Excuse me?
Yeah. So for example, if a child has a math problem that says, okay, you have a little car, how far can you go? How many miles can you go on a gallon of gas? And they do their math. And because it's all like on laptops, they move their little car to the hatch mark that they think is correct. Nope, the car moves back. Oh, they do it again. They repeat doing their math problem again and again. That little car is never going to go to the place where that child wants it to go. because they're assessing the grit and tenacity. And I worked with people who designed these assessments, and they actually showed me. Actually
So,
showed me these things.
so I'm a math major. Well, I was a math major, and I was good at math all along. Like, what in the world does that have to do with mathematics?
Nothing.
Okay.
No,
So
nothing.
how are they assessing children in the area of mathematics with something that has nothing to do with mathematics?
Well, that's a very valid question. And I've had these discussions in the education committee when I am on the
What,
record talking about this.
what's
They
their
are
answer?
not assessing academics. It's nonsensical. They are data mining. They'll have a few questions in there that might be mathematically related, but they have a whole host of things mixed in there that are not. And so I say all of that because, so let's go back to little Susie Q in a classical school who's learning how to do math like you learned and I learned, and science, and all these other things. And then she has to take this assessment that is measuring all this other stuff. How do you think she's going to do on that assessment? She's in a classical school. She's actually learning substance. She's not going to do well.
So she's not, yeah, she might not do well. Yep.
She's not going to do well. Okay, so then the next year for reconsideration to have her receive the funds to go to this school, the department's going to say, well, she's going to have to bring her scores up if you're going to want to. They may give her a few years, and then now she's got to raise her scores. So what is the school going to do that's desperate to have get money of tuition money for their school? Because private schools are, they have a hard time getting people to come and pay for their services. So they are going to be hungry for the funds. What do you think a classical school will do in order to keep those children that have vouchers or whatever you want to call it, backpack of money that goes with them?
I mean, they're going to, at some degree, comply with the I mean, money talks, right? People pay attention to money, and they will do whatever they need to do. I mean, it's
so you see
yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So you start to see the school eroding their primary principles in order to be able to stay in business. This is what happens. We have seen this in other states. California, for example, used to be wide open for school choice, for religious education. And now they've tightened it so much that it's the state that tells these homeschoolers, for example, this is the material you can use if they're in this educational savings account, which is they can be homeschooled. And I argue they're not homeschoolers once they join a government program. They are not homeschoolers. Homeschoolers are autonomous. And so there is a distinction there. And I am more than happy to debate that issue at some point. But so we've seen through the different states that have these educational savings accounts or vouchers or the money follows a child or whatever it is, we've seen over time the process or the open, free expression of everything change. And the legislature can't help themselves. And I mean, I watched our legislature. They hate charter schools. They'll do anything with any excuse to try and shut these schools down. And I mean, I have fought very, very hard to keep our charter schools going because it is an option. And even though I understand the problem here, but if we go full bore on school choice, we are going to find if homeschoolers jump in, say goodbye to your autonomy. Bye-bye. No way. I am not okay with that. Even though it's hard to homeschool, especially when you become a one-income family. I know. And then you have to be creative. You have to be creative and innovative. Private schools, They're all going to be the same. You're just going to degrade all of them. And it's all going to be, everything's going to be reduced to the most base level, which is exactly the agenda. If you read the education papers from UNESCO, the United Nations, this is a top-down thing coming down. All the states in the United States are affected by this. And people don't realize that this isn't just a Maine thing. This is a worldwide and really a United States-wide, especially, agenda to erode our education system. Common Core took everything to the most base level. And so that academic standard, then they talk about, oh, higher order thinking skills and critical thinking. That is the biggest crock. I can't even tell you. They've lowered them. They don't even know how to think. It's never mind. They don't know how to think or what to think because they're not introducing anything of content, but they do know how to react to things. They know how to be a little political activist because at kindergarten, they are actually being taught how to weaponize emotional vocabulary to manipulate their parents and are sent home to do that. So now we see these kids, since Common Core came in, now we're seeing these kids graduating, they're in college, and what are we seeing? Weaponized vocabulary, weaponizing our empathy, and they're political activists. You have kids leaving the Kennebunk High School to go out and protest and leave math class, for example. What is this? This isn't academics. And so this is how the erosion has taken place. And people just think, oh, well, school choice is going to answer all of that. No, that's a trap. It's a trap. Now, I will tell you, there are options to consider. And these are things that I have talked about. Open enrollment. If we had open enrollment and we had parents, literally the money follows the child within the public education system. I mean, I lived in a town with an excellent elementary school.
So can you like, when you say open enrollment, what do you mean? So where the child falls the money within the public education system, what does that mean?
So that means, like, that was what I was going to say. So like Alfred used to be an excellent elementary school. I mean, it's a decent one, but it's not like it was. And that had a lot to do with the principal. Parents could bring their kids because they want to go to Alfred Elementary School because of its high quality of education and the teachers that they had that actually engaged their kids in academics and didn't have funky things going on. So people would be, like, all right, I'll drive from Saco to bring my child to Alfred, or I'll come from Sanford and go to the Alfred school. So you would have, obviously the little school would reach capacity pretty fast, but it's because of what they're doing. So the competing schools that are losing money, what are they going to have to do? What is Alfred doing? We better figure out what they're doing, and we start doing that. So that would start to open up more of that free market stuff. Whereas right now, they don't have any accountability. There's absolutely nothing that challenges them to improve. The whole argument of charter schools, well, they'll help the public schools. Tell me how. That's garbage. That's a falsehood. And so I think open enrollment is a big idea. The other thing is, if you actually had an intelligent commissioner of education, you could have pilot schools. Now, many years ago, I had, in our district, we had a sister district that was up north, and they were doing some really dumb things. I mean, like, really destructive things. It was not a good educational system. The school in the north, they changed what they were doing, and that had everything to do with the school board, and the school board started to shift, educate the superintendents and the principals, and teachers that were good teachers were like, we want to do this. And so they have pilot schools in their district where they got rid of the stupid math. They started teaching arithmetic. They were teaching phonics, and their literacy rates went up. They actually teach science. They didn't embrace all of this newfangled stuff, because that newfangled stuff is literally a stripped down version of its previous self, and they've seen results. So you can be doing things like that within the public education system. But I would say if you have the ability right now, if you have the ability to homeschool your children or put them in a school that you have more of oversight and interaction and you can actually see what they're doing, I would be doing that, because most of these schools, everybody thinks, oh, it's not happening in my district. I went to that school. Oh, it's fine. I graduated and I'm okay. This is what I hear all the time from parents. It's like, oh, you have no idea how much these schools have changed and how they have these hidden agendas that they may not be very forthcoming in the policies that they're adhering to, and they have these internal, policies that they are, it's like this silent communication that happens within the school. Parents have no idea it's going on, and this is why working with school boards and exposing this stuff and repealing some of these horrible, egregious policies and replacing them with good, solid, good governance policies is extremely important. So that's why I'm focused on that with Maine Education Initiative. But I don't think the money following the child, and I've said this, I've been very, very vocal about it. If there are grants that there are no strings attached, I'm all for it. No strings attached. And no strings can be attached.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is, sorry, with the charter schools, essentially, that there were strings attached. Obviously they had to pass those tests. Now, like, one of the questions I've got from somebody else who is involved in this had kind of asked, like, what if we're talking about a refundable tax credit? Is that something that you're more open to potentially?
Tax credits, I actually put in a bill. I think I did it. I can't remember now, but I know I put one bill in that was specifically a tax credit, and it was geared towards those with lower income that still pay taxes. So there's that issue, which I haven't really thought about. Because the ones that aren't paying taxes, they don't get a tax credit. So there's a lot of issues there, but no, I think a tax credit for an individual, I think is fair. I think that's fair. Again, you choose where your child goes, but I don't really have a problem with that. And I know right now they're talking about, grants. I've made a lot of
the voucher program, which is grants.
Yeah, a voucher program, though most voucher programs are tied to the state or the federal government, and then as soon as they're tied to that, I don't care what administration is, that they're, both sides of the aisle have passed really dumb education policies that are destructive. So, they both are equally guilty. Sorry.
Okay.
To drop
No, you're good. My brain got distracted. So, like, I guess, like, so my question initially was, like, what if, I don't know, like, obviously I totally get it. What if there are government strings attached to it? I think that's dangerous, right? Like, I think that parents should be able to have the freedom to homeschool and educate their children, however they want. I think they already have requirements that don't they already have to pass some sort of a test in order for the kids to be able to graduate each grade? No, there's no standard if you're in
There's
homeschool.
a couple of things that a homeschooler needs to do. They can take a standardized test. I strongly discourage them from taking the one at the public school. They can take the test, which all they would do is well, it's not going to end well for them for the most part. You can take your own standardized test, and there's definitely a number of options, like the Iowa test, and you work with a certified teacher. You bring a bunch of kids together, like a homeschool co-op or whatever, and you do that over a few days. That's, it's a standardized test. That's academic related. And there's like the Stanford achievement test, the California achievement tests. They're academically oriented. So homeschoolers can do those, and then they have to submit to the Department of Education just a letter from a certified educator that says, I've met with this child, a program is placed and progress has been made, and I have seen their achievement tests results. You don't send the results. I discourage that. You don't send the results to the state. You have a certified teacher, and most of these homeschool groups are connected with certified teachers that understand how to do this. And if not, people can always reach out to me. I can give them some suggestions of who to get that sort of help from. The other option is basically portfolio option, which is what I chose to do with all my kids. And they would meet with a certified teacher and go through their portfolio on all the academics that they did, samples of what they have done throughout their school year, field trips, special events, speaking engagement, you name it, whatever they've done, projects. So the teacher would be sitting there interviewing them, like, tell me about this and tell me about that. And the kids would be so excited talking about what they have done. And then the teacher would write, again, 3 sentences. I've met with this child, a program is in place and progress is being made. When they get to high school, these are the subjects that they have covered. And then they send that to the state. That's all that they need. I know my kids thought those, it took a lot of work putting those portfolios together, and they're like, oh, can we do this again tomorrow? Because they just got so excited about being able to share what they have done. And when you have an excited student, that is a whole lot different than, oh, I just did this achievement test, it was horrible. And, and they don't really understand the scores that come out. I mean, but parents can choose what they want to do on that. That was just what I chose.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. So I think kind of what I want to circle back to, because I think I was talking to somebody else, and the main concern that they had with kind of the school choice program, and we'll call it the vouchers, or just the idea that the money follows the child. Part of their concern was, like, again, if the government is like giving rather than like through a tax credit, right? If the government is giving money to parents, that's going to come with strings. Maybe it might start with very little strings, but those strings are eventually going to get more stringent.
Historically. Yep.
Yeah. And so, but my question becomes this, and this is something that I don't completely understand. Like, the government already has authority essentially over the education, right? There's a process where, teacher, like, if you're homeschooling, you have to submit stuff through that process that you just said. Obviously, it's it's so much less stringent than like the rules if you're the things that have to be followed if you're receiving government money with the private school, the private like charter schools, or like just the way that they do things in the public school. Like, but like ultimately they have, in a sense, I don't know if I say final say, but they have a sense of authority over education of children to ensure that the children are being educated because of the way that the Maine state constitution is written, that we're required to provide an education for all children residing in the state of Maine. So I guess the question becomes, like, couldn't they just require some of these nonsense things to be taught anyway, even if there's no money attached, and just not approved? Doesn't the risk still exist even if there's no money involved? Or like, what do you have to say? Because I'm just kind of like,
no, the laws in Maine for homeschooling are very reasonable. And so they just have categories. They do require you to do Maine studies. Well, you determine what that is. They require history, US history, and one other history, world history, or it could be social studies, it could be a bunch of things. But they require 4 years of English. They require 2 years of math. It's most base level. I mean, most homeschoolers I know far excel at what they require as a state. And what's interesting, you can't even find this on the state website. The DOE has like gotten rid of all these, anything that would encourage people to strive for excellence. That is pretty much gone. But you need to have 2.5 credits of science. That means 2 sciences and 1 has to be a lab. Social studies, there has to be fine arts, there has to be phys ed, and there has to be health. you determine what that is. So you're not doing the health that they teach in the public school, but some parents put their kids in school for health. I'm not quite sure why, unless you want your kids coming out very confused now. But that those are the criteria, and then you can expand from there. So it's not super defined, like you have to teach this, that. Now, I know other states where they are requiring them to take that, or they limit the options that they have to, like, so if you're going to buy materials, this is what you have to buy. You don't have freedom. We don't have that going on in Maine. Thank God. I mean, the homeschool community is pretty healthy here in Maine, and I want to keep it that way. And unfortunately, we have some renegade individuals that try and put extra legal ease in the requirements for homeschoolers, and it's not part of the law. So here, I'm just going to encourage anyone that's a homeschooler or thinking about it, look at the law, read the law, know what it says, keep it handy, because the Department of Education here in Maine currently, excuse me, is trying to sneak in all kinds of stuff that is not required. Like, you don't have to tell them your child's birth date. You don't have to tell them a lot of things about your child, yet parents just willingly give over this information. And so study the law and know what it says.
Okay, no, that makes sense, and I still think that it sounds like obviously when there's money involved, the strings that are attached, like this is the danger that I see, right? And I think you're kind of saying this in different ways. Is like maybe initially they offer up this money and they don't have these strings attached, and then a couple years later they're like, and people get used to it, and they get to the point where they depend on it, and then they're like, oh, in order to keeping this money, you have to do such and such,
Yeah.
in order to you have to have your child be able to pass like a gender ideology, like
Yeah.
whatever it is. There would be some
There
element
would be a
there.
revolt
And
that happened. Augusta would be flooded with homeschoolers.
yeah,
I
well,
would lead the charge.
yeah. Oh, I believe it, but you just never know what might happen
Yeah.
when there's money involved. But I also still think, like, obviously, like, and maybe you can bring some more clarity to this. Like, Democrats at the moment control the House, the Senate, and the gubernatorial, the governor's seat. So, like, couldn't they still? So you said that they're great laws right now, but like, isn't there a risk that they could change those laws as it is? Like, they don't
Yeah.
need 2/3 vote, right? Necessarily, they just need to pass it. And so, like, I feel like the risk. My point about a lot of that stuff is like, I feel like regardless of whether you've got a voucher program or you have school choice that includes these different situations, that ultimately, like, obviously, when there's money involved, the government could, it's easier for them to not have to, like, change the homeschool laws, but more just say, if you're going to receive government money, you have to, right? So it makes it a little bit easier for them to twist. But the reality is as long as they control the legislature, they could do it anyway. They could, and as you said, there would be a revolt. We'd say a ton of people would be going, but as we know, right, Democrats don't care if the people come out in droves to speak up about how they think things should be. They generally tend to just vote according to their ideology rather than paying attention to what the people of Maine want, which is why, despite the fact that like somewhere around 80% of the people in Maine believe that abortion beyond viability is not a good idea, they still rammed that through, right, as
Right.
one of the examples.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of other situations, but yeah, so I see that's kind of where I'm coming from. Obviously, if there's not, it doesn't appear to be a ton of value if the private schools are not a really good option, for the charters. Then why go through all the rigmarole of creating this a school choice program that includes those? But I think the bigger concern is just that the Democrats are in control and that they are about power and control. And I think that I'd be worried about the risk of what they might do anyway.
Well, I think I am concerned. I have been. I was a staunch advocate for homeschoolers, and being on the education committee, I was slightly vocal. And so nobody wanted to take me on the homeschool thing. No, nobody. we don't have any real strong voices now. And I mean, I have had to call the commissioner of education and corrected some of the things that her staff was doing with the homeschool applications, and she did back down. But it's a concern because it could be very quick. They could do it very quickly.
Yeah.
And many homeschoolers are very comfortable. And, those of us, so it goes back to the late 80s and 90s that I was cutting my teeth in the homeschool world. And when I started, I knew 2 people that homeschooled. That was it. And
Mhm.
now it's everywhere. And, you were this bizarre, crazy person that was homeschooling. And by the way, it was my principal at the elementary school that recommended I homeschool my son. So just not even public school staff, the superintendent at the time was so supportive of what we were doing, and the homeschoolers that we were working with, and we were doing science classes at the school with the science teacher helping us get the materials. I don't think you'd ever see that now. And which is sad because they're all, as our superintendent used to say, they're all our kids and we want to help all of them. But I think it's a risk. I'll just leave it at that. It's a risk, and homeschoolers need to make sure they're alert and paying attention, because people fought hard to get us to where we are, and the policies that we have now, the laws that we have now that are very favorable, those were hard fought for. And that was going on in the 80s and early 90s. And so it's just kind of like, going back to the founding of our country, all those who fought so hard for our freedoms and our liberties. Look at what's happening. They're not even being taught what really happened, and they're like changing American history. So it's not even, you can read primary sources of individuals that lived in that period of time to verify whether the crazy stuff they're teaching now is even slightly true. It's not, and it's just made up fabricated garbage. So same battle we're facing, that's in a large scale, but on the homeschool front, same thing. You're just like, there were people that forged ahead and paved the way for the homeschoolers to have the freedoms we have here in Maine. And I'm one of them that's going to continue to make a lot of noise about that. By the way, guys, we fought hard for this.
Mm-hmm. So as a follow-up question, like, so obviously, like, I think I mentioned one of the things, I had David Giles on, and he's like not interested in, he's against school choice for a variety of reasons. He thinks, but he's in favor of sending kids back to public school. He's trying to argue that we need more of the homeschoolers to come back to the public school, because then that would get parents involved in the school boards, and that would help us make sure that the school boards shift policy to a conservative perspective in the rural neighborhoods. We can make this happen. What's kind of like, what's your response to that thought process?
Well, with all due respect, that's very naive. He doesn't understand. He does not know what is going on in the schools. Why would any parent who's homeschooling their child willingly put them in the current situation? Rural public schools are even more vulnerable than the city schools. I mean, the city schools embrace this stuff. And so everybody knows it. The parents, they all think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You go to the rural communities, and I just dealt with a district in Danforth where you have egregious policies that the parents don't know about it because they're hiding it. The administration hides these things. They literally keep that policy out of the handbook that the parents are supposed to sign. Like, oh, I've read this. I understand what you expect from me. They hide it from them. They hide it from the teachers even. But they have this, like I said earlier, this internal dialogue and this internal policy that it permeates the atmosphere, and it's this chilling effect amongst the teachers. And they don't even know this is driven by some sort of policy. And so they take over these small rural towns with salt of the earth people, common sense individuals. And I get really angry thinking about how they did that. And I look at the two administrators that were there when I was up there, and it's almost like they're smug. They can get away with this because these are, it's almost like, well, it's insulting because it's like these people are just simple. They're never going to figure this out, and we can pull this off on them. That is infuriating. That is insulting to these people, and these people are not simple. They're trusting. They're trusting that their school is going to actually care for the well-being of their children. Well, some of these administrators are plants that have shown up for an agenda to push it. And they try and use all kinds of, flowery vocabulary to sell it on people. But in this particular community, they didn't even know this policy existed. And so I would, and where I'm working with these school boards, I'll tell you right now, it's in every district, and it's probably, I'm now more suspicious about the small rural towns being hijacked and their kids co-opted, and the parents aren't even going to know what hit them. And all of a sudden their kids are coming to them with all kinds of crazy ideas. And that is criminal behavior. That is malpractice. And it's a violation of federal law when you actually are doing things without parents' consent.
Yeah, no, I think that like I have a hard time. My wife is not yet here, but when she gets here, we're we want to have children eventually. And like one of the things I told her before she came here, I was like, well, she still hasn't come here, but what I told her early on, I said is like, I'm not sending my kids to the public school. And I can't, like at this point, there are so many different reasons. One is like, the vaccine schedule requirements, which hopefully at some point we'll be able to get those in order, especially with the announcements that came out yesterday.
Yes.
But there's that, which is just a huge violation of parental rights to be able to determine how to best take care of their children, rather than forcing them to make medical decisions that they don't agree with because they don't have the ability to, for instance, homeschool their kids if it's a family that can't afford can't afford that because it's expensive to live, and some families have to do the two income household and can't get by with. I would say that in general, find a way. Families, like I would say that try to be creative and figure out how you can do that if you're in that place because it's worth it. But ultimately, yeah, I'm kind of more in the years ago. I used to be more in favor. I remember having a conversation with a church group where at the time, this is before I knew what was going on. I just remember my own public school experience, which wasn't amazing because high school is a whole nother story, but I believed that at the time that we should be in the public school. But I didn't even engage in this conversation because this was a conversation with someone saying that kids shouldn't even be in private Christian schools is where he was saying. He was like, kids should be taught by their parents. And, it's interesting is I remember thinking he was a nut. Cause I was like, not only do I not think that every kid needs to be taught by their parents, I would not send them to Christian schools at the time. Again, over time, especially as what's really going on in the education system have come out, I'm on the exact opposite end of where I was at the time. Because it's just they're so corrupt at this point. And and especially in some of these not just rural, not just urban neighborhoods, but to your point, in these rural ones, fortunately we had a teacher up there who was willing to stand up and say, I will not comply, and threatened to give her resignation.
Well, she did. She resigned.
Right.
Yeah, she did resign. But here's the thing about that. None of the other teachers knew that policy existed either. And we're talking about the transgender, gender expansive policy, ACAAA. And that was hatched in the Portland schools and then pushed by main school management onto the schools. It's a ridiculous policy, and it's all about keeping secrets from parents. And so it's an absolute violation of federal law. And of course, in this state, Maine is lawless. They don't care about federal law. But you know what? the day of reckoning is coming, because lawsuits have been filed, and we're going to start seeing that they're going to be flipping on this issue, or reinforcing the fact that parents have rights. And but yeah, this is, so you had teachers that didn't know about it, you had parents that didn't know about it, and you had a concerted effort by the administration to keep it hidden. And this is what they think they can get away with. That's really a cocky attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so fortunately in that situation, the school board, removed it.
They
And
were rock stars.
what did the superintendent, what did he do?
She quit. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the first thing they did, well, the first thing, I mean, there's so much that goes on where they're trying to keep people in the dark. So school boards throughout the state of Maine do not know the law that gives them their authority. And they do not understand the roles and responsibilities of school board and superintendents. So one of the things that happens is superintendents pretty much take control of the agenda. That's not the superintendent's responsibility. That's the board chair's responsibility. And so there was just working with the chair and first showing her the law, showing the school board members the law. And that opened their eyes, because they have literally been lied to. And you have a law firm that comes and talks to them, and it's not what they say, it's what they don't say. So they withhold information from them. And I dare say they do. They do tell them mistruths, let's say. And so it was opening their eyes to, okay, you're in charge of this agenda. You want to bring these issues forward. You can bring them forward. And I coached her through this, and here are parliamentary procedures, how you do it. And this is what your authority is. And so they were able to bring forward the policy. All the school board members were up to speed. They had read the policy and asked for a vote to repeal it. The superintendent was not aware that that was going to happen, and because it really wasn't her business, and she was trying to convince them they had to be browbeaten by Drummond and Woodson one more time, and we have to have executive session, so you can't talk about this in the school board meeting. No, you do talk about this, because this is a public meeting. So they brought that forward, unanimous vote. The place erupts. Almost 150 people there. And they're like war whooping, happy, excited. Then they pass a resolution that basically says that we're going to ensure that our girls have safe spaces in sports. And that's the Title IX resolution that the Maine Education Initiative provides to them. And so that outline, that actually directs the superintendent to do 4 different things. The superintendent didn't know this either. So this all comes rolling out, because the chair can bring things forward as she chooses at that moment. She doesn't have to go through hoops, didn't have to go through committee hearings. And so she was right within her bounds of her authority. And this is the big thing. If you don't know your authority, you don't know how to exercise it. And so this is what happened. And then the other interesting thing is, so this teacher who had this powerful resignation letter, this principal and the superintendent did not want that letter to be read in the public. But hey, you resign, that letter is public, but they didn't want it read in the public. So it's the whole thing of just hiding everything. It's so disgusting. So the chair pulls out the resignation letter, she reads it, and then says, we do not want to accept this teacher's resignation. And the place just erupted, because she's a beloved teacher. And it was after that the people were leaving, and then the superintendent asked for an executive session, and then she quit. So that was
so interesting. It's so interesting. I remember you the first conversation that you and I had before having you come on the podcast again. I think it was either I think it was late December, it might have been early January, but it was one of those two. And I remember talking about the fact that the superintendents come in and kind of act as though they're leading the school board, and in reality, they are the employee of the school board, and the school board. I mean, they answer to the school board there,
Yeah.
and so like, but that's how it happens all across the state. I know from other people in different districts, and city councils are kind of a similar way where the town manager or whatever city manager comes in and kind of creates the agenda, but really that needs to be the chair of the school board. And
they give up their responsibility because they don't know, because this is how it's always been. But that's what they're telling them. It's like, you are directors of the district and the superintendent serves at your pleasure. You hire them, they're your one employee that you're responsible for. You can fire them.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a combination of things that happened and allowed us to get to this point, and why it still is this way in a lot of districts is there's a lot of trust, right? Like, I work for a nonprofit, and I don't work for a nonprofit. I'm on the board for a nonprofit, and we have a chair, we have an executive director, and like the creation of, and a lot of what happens during the board meeting is a lot of like hearing from the executive director about what's happening on the ground, because we're not on the ground, right? And so, like, fortunately, high level of trust in this situation, but we still have to ask questions. We trust but verify, right? And I think a lot of what's happened is there hasn't been the but verify part in the schools, and a lot of people are unaware, and liberals have slowly, even in like conservative districts like in Gardner, which I think is more conservative than it is liberal in terms of if you actually looked at the makeup of the voters in that area. And yet I understand that just a couple of years ago, there was an 11-1, liberal to conservative makeup there. Not that way anymore, as I understand, moving in a positive direction. But the truth is like, it's because we as conservatives largely have been asleep at the wheel,
Right.
and we've been trusting that, like, yeah, we knew that there was a political divide, right? We knew that some people are liberal and some people are conservative, but what's become abundantly clear over the course of the past, I would say 5 to 10 years, but you could go back a bit further, but specifically in the last 5 years, is how substantial that worldview shift is. That we're talking about, like, you used to be able to say, I think, that like we both want to get to the same place, but we just have a different idea of how to get there, and you can't say that anymore,
No,
right? That
COVID
they did
changed
not.
that. COVID changed that.
It revealed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Well,
didn't change
yeah.
it. It revealed it because it was
Well,
already there. We just didn't know.
They hatched things during COVID and brought them out. It was like these viper eggs were crushed and they or hatched during COVID, and so much of this stuff bubbled to the surface. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's become even more clear, in the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, and how so many people were like, "Shoot, why did he have to miss? Better get him next time." These types of things, and then obviously with the way that they behaved with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and so like the divide is very. We have to work hard, and we have to take our school boards back, but don't trust. In my opinion, if you're able to find a way to do it, I would not trust the public education system with our children, because of like this type of nonsense that, and even when, even if you get the right school administrator, there are other things that teachers are doing, so there's a lot.
Right administrators could have a big difference if they're paying attention. And I
I agree.
The reason I'm involved, here I was a homeschooler, and I've been fighting for public education now for 13 years and didn't expect to be in this arena. However, this is our future civil society. And I've worked with too many kids and parents who have no other alternative. They don't have an alternative. Everyone's like, oh, you can just homeschool. No, it's not that simple, people. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of it, but it is not always possible. And so what about those kids? I care about those kids, and I want them to have the best opportunities to live to their fullest potential that God has created them to be. And that is what our public education system used to be all about. And it has been hijacked by progressives that are deconstructing our civil society. And so we see what we see. And I'm stupid enough to think that I can put my finger in the dike and kind of stem the stem the flood. So, and just bring other people along and start educating school board members. And, it's happening. It's happening. And I'm
Yeah.
excited
No,
about it.
I'm excited too. What's coming up next? What's the next big push? What's the next big thing?
Well, well, we do have our Voices of Truth, uh, I don't know what we call it, symposium, October 13th in Augusta, and
On
that's
Is that Columbus Day? Am I right?
that's Columbus Day. So we'll be hearing from students, parents, and teachers, and we'll have a few other surprises there. And but as far as the school boards, I mean, we're being reached out to. I'm getting calls. I was on a call today with 3 different districts, and the momentum is building, and so it's pretty exciting. And we'll see some. There's going to be an interview coming up from 3 school board members talking about their story. And so a lot is happening. Some of it hasn't quite come to the point where we are seeing, this anything super specific, but there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes as you prepare. So it's everything is speeding up. You first try and get the ball moving, and then you have to get that inertia. You overcome the inertia, and then it starts to roll. So we're at the point where we're now kind of chasing the ball as it's rolling, and
Nice.
people are excited. The school board members are like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't have any idea I had this authority. I didn't have any idea we could do this." So you're starting to give these people, they're giving back their rightful authority, and it's like they're standing up taller, and they're excited now, rather than, the calls I used to get like, why am I even on this board? Can't ever do anything. It's useless. It's why bother? And well, you don't know what your authority is. So it's shifting that needle has been fun, and it continues. So
That's
that's
awesome.
that's kind of what we're up to. And that'll be in the
And
news. You'll hear about it.
nice. Looking forward to it. And we've got fixmainschools.com is where they can find out more information about Maine Education Initiative, which you run. And how do they learn more about the Voices of Truth Symposium? How do they get signed up for that? Or how can they find out? It's at the Elks Lodge in
It's at
Augusta.
the Lodge on the 13th. The doors open at 5. You need to get tickets ahead of time. Go to Parents' Rights in Education and their Facebook, Parents' Rights in Education, I think is it .com, or you just reach out to me and I'll forward it to them. And
Okay. There we go.
I should have had that in front of me.
That's
Shame on
right. I should have warned you or had it myself.
Alan's
How
gonna
do
listen to this and be like, shame on you. I'm like, yeah,
they?
that's where you need to fix.
If I don't say this next thing, he'll critique me. But before I do that, how do they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me at Heidi at fixmainschools.com. Fixmainschools.com. Just send me an email, or you can text me or call me at 207-590-1909.
All right. Well, there you go. And so one of the things Alan has been giving me a hard time about, so that's why I'm going to remember to say it since you brought him up, is if you're watching, be sure to like, share, subscribe. We're on all the different platforms. So a lot more people, I think, are going to like the shorts. So Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok is where the shorts get posted. So if you could go there, find me, like, share, subscribe, all that, so that we can get those shorts out so that people can engage a little bit more with what's going on in our state and see people who are actually talking about what's really going on and trying to fix it, rather than the mainstream media and all the nonsense that they're putting out there and trying to avoid actually engaging on real issues, but really just being the propaganda arm of the left that they are. So thank you all for watching. Thank you so much for being on again today, Heidi. It's always a good time, good conversation, and love the work that you're doing and the team that you've put together there, and really excited to see where things go over the course of the next couple of years.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Chuck.
All right. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you back here, I think, Thursday. We've got the infamous Alvin Louis on, so of Courage is a Habit. Yeah. Yeah, I've got, just for fun. He had me send him one of my hats, and he sent me one of his hats. So I'm going to wear his Embrace Exclusion hat while he wears my Muddy Waters hat for the podcast on Thursday. So I'm very excited.
I was running around with one of his hats on today in the rain. So yeah.
Nice. Nice.